I'm very, very pleased to be here and to be talking to you folks, because what I'm going to be saying is something that everybody in Spain should hear, not just the people at this conference. Okay? Because what I'm really going to focus on is how I've found throughout Spain that many teachers feel the same way about the traditional method of teaching, and that is, it doesn't really work. In fact, some teachers say it's a complete failure. Now, the traditional method is basing teaching on memory, making memory the only kind of thinking that they focus students on. And many of them tell me the same thing. They say that this focuses students on passing their tests. So they feel that what they're learning isn't important in itself, but it's important to help them pass tests so that they can go on to the next test and the next test and finish school quickly so that they can go out into the real world. Now that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but that's really the message that I get from a lot of teachers. And I, of course, experience that in other countries when I go and visit them and work with teachers on how to change things. Because what I will be doing is showing these teachers another methodology that contrasts with teaching only for memory. And that is to make learning based on good thinking, to help students learn not just how to memorize things, but how to think carefully when they make decisions, when they solve problems, when they think about what's going to happen in the future, when they make predictions, so that they're not just guessing and they're not just deciding to do something without thinking much about it. They know how to think carefully and how to make good decisions and how to think well. So I will show teachers how they can do that and make that a basis for the content learning that the students are doing, so that they come to really get involved in thinking about, say, the causes of the French Revolution, if they're learning about that. Or if they're young children, they're thinking about characters in the stories they're reading and what they think the characters will be doing next, and whether what the characters are making good decisions in the stories. So that the students are really thinking independently about what they're reading and what they're learning, so that they learn how to read much better, and they're interested in what they're reading. They're interested in what they learn in history. They learn how to think carefully in science, in mathematics, and they don't just memorize things. So that's really the basic message I'm going to be trying to get across. And I just want to say one other thing, that it's going to be through showing the teachers here what other teachers have done to help students develop good thinking skills. Okay, and I want to say that because the teachers are the experts.
Buenas tardes a todos y bienvenidos a la conferencia de hoy, Aprendizaje basado en el pensamiento. Hoy tenemos con nosotros a Robert Swartz, que es uno de los líderes mundiales en el aprendizaje basado en el pensamiento. Quiero dar también la bienvenida pues, a las personas, por supuesto, que están en la sala hoy escuchándonos de forma presencial, y luego también a todas las personas que nos están escuchando por videoconferencia en Huesca, en Logroño y en Guadalajara. Todos ustedes saben que una vez Robert Swartz de la conferencia estableceremos un coloquio al que todos están invitados, todas las personas de la sala, y también las personas que nos están escuchando en nuestros centros culturales también pueden participar del coloquio. Las 9 conferencias del bloque 1 del programa de este año, de Educar para el Futuro 2016, recordarles que se van grabando por videoconferencia y van subiéndose a la web de Obra Social, y pueden ustedes verlas en Aula en Red de Obra Social de Ibercaja. La quinta edición de nuestro programa, pues me llena de satisfacción poderles transmitir que está siendo seguida por miles de personas de forma presencial y también online. Esto es algo pues que nos llena de satisfacción a la Obra Social de Ibercaja y bueno, y yo como responsable del programa, pues de estar apoyando de una forma tan activa el cambio de paradigma que está demandando la educación aquí en este país, en España. Hemos escuchado a lo largo de estas semanas pues, a verdaderos líderes mundiales que están aportando la innovación educativa. Hemos tenido la oportunidad de estar con Richard Herbert, con John Duñabeitia, Charo Valle, Tina Maquela. Todos ellos nos han ido aportando recursos, metodologías, ideas. Hemos hablado pues, de cómo hacer efectiva la innovación pedagógica, de cómo conseguir que la educación contribuya a hacer de nuestros jóvenes verdaderos protagonistas para hacer un mundo mejor. Hemos hablado de los avances de la neurociencia relacionados con el multilingüismo. También hablamos la semana pasada de este problema que tanto nos preocupa, ¿no?, del acoso escolar. Y hoy vamos a tratar de un aspecto muy interesante de la mano de Robert Swartz, uno de los líderes mundiales, como decíamos, sobre estrategias de pensamiento. Estamos todos convencidos de que en una época de cambio global es fundamental hacer de nuestros jóvenes personas con criterio, capaces de ser creativos, críticos, para que su aprendizaje sea mejor y más profundo. Robert Swartz es director del National Center of Teacher Thinking, organización educativa fundada en 1989 y actualmente es una de las organizaciones líder en el mundo de la enseñanza del pensamiento. Desde hace más de 25 años ha entrenado a profesores y educadores de escuelas y universidades alrededor del mundo en la enseñanza y aprendizaje basados en el pensamiento crítico y creativo. Esta instrucción consiste en ayudar a que el profesor enseñe a sus alumnos a pensar y a aprender con destreza los conocimientos de la materia estudiada en clase, aplicando técnicas y hábitos del pensamiento necesarios para desarrollar en el alumno esta capacidad. Robert Swartz, por nombrar algunas de sus rasgos de su currículum, es doctor en filosofía, graduado en la Universidad de Harvard, profesor emérito en la Universidad de Massachusetts, en Boston. Ha trabajado, como decíamos, más de 25 años con educadores de colegios y universidades alrededor del mundo, desarrollando e impartiendo cursos de formación profesional sobre la difusión del pensamiento crítico y creativo en los contenidos curriculares. Ha publicado numerosos libros y artículos sobre la enseñanza del pensamiento crítico y creativo en todos los niveles educativos. Su trabajo más reciente, del cual es autor líder de un equipo de 5 autores, es el libro Thinking Based Learning, que tienen ustedes además la oportunidad de adquirirlo hoy aquí a la salida del Salón de Actos. Ha sido por muchos años consultor para el National Assessment of Educational Progress en los Estados Unidos y ha participado en numerosos proyectos de innovación curricular y educativa en diversos países como Australia, Nueva Zelanda, Arabia Saudí, Malasia, Chile, entre otros. Actualmente también es de destacar que es miembro del comité organizador de la Conferencia Internacional sobre Pensamiento, conocido como ICOT. Allí es donde tuve la suerte de conocer a Bob. Bueno, antes de pasar a la conferencia, quería agradecer a la editorial Santillana su profesional y generosa colaboración para que pudiera llevarse a cabo este evento. Y también todos los detalles con los que han querido obsequiar a los asistentes. De verdad, muchísimas gracias en nombre de todo el equipo del Patio de la Infanta. Por si nos alargamos en la conferencia, simplemente recordarles con pena que el programa Educar para el Futuro está llegando a su fin. La semana que viene serán prácticamente las últimas actividades del programa. Estará aquí con nosotros Mar Romera, que dirigirá una conferencia Cómo influyen las emociones en el aprendizaje, sentir pensando y pensar sintiendo, y 2 actividades dirigidas a públicos específicos, a equipos directivos, liderazgo pedagógico y emocional para equipos directivos, y para abuelos, taller con ojos de abuelo, aplicamos la educación emocional con los nietos. Todas estas actividades se van a desarrollar aquí, en Ibercaja Patio de la Infanta. Ustedes pueden acceder a ellas a través de nuestra web y a través de los folletos que se les entregan aquí hoy en el centro. Tienen toda la información sobre estas 3 actividades tan interesantes que vamos a tener la semana que viene. Y bueno, como hoy también me dirijo a un público mayoritariamente docente, a los que, bueno, por supuesto quiero felicitar por su dedicación y su empeño en recibir formación y, a lo largo de todas estas semanas, y hoy, como no iba a ser de otra manera, teniendo aquí a Robert Swartz, pues también hoy el salón está lleno, ¿no? Me dirijo también a vosotros, no quiero perder esta oportunidad para comentarles que el próximo 27 de abril tendremos aquí en Ibercaja, Patio de la Infanta, con nosotros a Iwan McIntosh impartiendo la conferencia Nuevos Horizontes de Aprendizaje. Lo comento porque muchas veces viene bien organizar nuestras complicadísimas agendas, ¿no? Pues para que sepan que, pues gracias a la ECA, a Escuelas Católicas de Aragón, vamos a tener aquí en Ibercaja, Patio de la Infanta, el 27 de abril, bueno, pues a este profesional de tan renombrado prestigio a nivel mundial. Y bueno, termino comentando que tienen ustedes a disposición el cuadernillo del año 2015, donde pueden descargarse las conferencias también del año pasado, y también animarles a que, bueno, pues a que nos dejen todas las sugerencias, observaciones que quieran a través de la encuesta que les dejamos o bien a través de nuestra página web. No quiero alargarme más y quiero, bueno, pues darle la bienvenida y agradecerle a Robert Swartz nuevamente que esté aquí hoy con nosotros. Muchísimas gracias, Robert.
Well, I'm going to stand up and walk around. So I'm really delighted to be here because this is one of my favorite cities and I don't get here much, so maybe I'll start coming more and more. And I'm really very impressed with the organization that has put this conference together because I didn't realize, you know, how innovative the conference was. Because I go to a lot of conferences and there are a lot of people and a lot of presenters, you know, and things squeezed into 2 or 3 days. And after a week, you think to yourself, what did that person talk about? Okay, but this kind of conference where you have a different person each time gives you time to reflect and to think about the ideas. So I'm really, again, happy to be here. Now, I'm going to share with you a lot from my own experience in the work that I do, which is mainly now work with teachers in schools, trying to implement the idea of thinking-based learning. And people ask me, what's thinking-based learning? And I say, it's what it sounds like. It's learning based on thinking. Okay, but what's that? Well, that's what I'm going to show you tonight. So let me just start and get into it. And after we're finished, there'll be a chance to ask questions and make comments. So like Richard Gerber, you've heard Richard here. Okay, I want to start by focusing on change. Because from about a minute after midnight in the year 2000, I started hearing people say, this is the century of change. We need to change, especially education. So let's focus on that, because that made me remember, okay, what one of the first philosophers, at least recorded philosophers, said back 500 BC, the person that, I won't say discovered change, but that made change a thing to think about. And he said that, well, we can't step into the same river twice, even though it's the same river, because new waters are ever flowing in around us. There's constant change, even in the things that we think are stable. And now that's interesting, and it's interesting because it's a saying by this philosopher, Heraclitus, from 500 BC, that people repeat even today. Okay, and when you think about it, actually, you know, we have a river, but there's stepping into the river itself, well, that's not so exciting, but when you step into this kind of area where the waters are flowing in around you and things are changing, okay, it sort of energizes you, okay? And that's what change does, of course, but we have to be careful because this too is a river where new waters are ever flowing in. And if you try to step into this one, you're not going to be standing very long. You're going to get swept away. And I like to show this because many, many teachers, you know, in this century are feeling this way. I remember talking to a teacher, you know, who, and I thought she was about to cry. And I was sad for her, and I said, "What's wrong?" And she said to me, "I don't know what I'm going to do." So I said, "Why? What's happened?" And she said, "Well, it was just announced that all of our students are getting tablets this year, and that we're going to get rid of the books, no textbooks." She said, "I don't know what I'm going to do. I've never had a tablet. I don't know how to use one. Okay? And maybe my students do, but I'm supposed to be the teacher." Well, I thought, this is somebody getting swept away by the waters of change. Okay, and I'm not sure she's still at the same school, actually. So we need to be careful. Well, change is a theme for tonight, but not this kind of change, not change imposed on schools from the outside. Because often that happens, okay, and it's generated by people who are thinking about what they think education should be, but probably have never been in classrooms themselves ever and have no experience of good education. But the kind of change I want to show you tonight is change from within. And that's the kind of change that to me makes the most sense. It's reflective change, change based on the experience and reflection of teachers. And I want to say at the outset, I'm going to show you a lot of examples of classrooms, and I'm going to try to help you make sense of what's going on in these classrooms. But these are classrooms of teachers, and they're classrooms of teachers who have done different things that are different, and things that really work well with children. Okay, and they exemplify what I call thinking-based learning. So I say that because, and I want to emphasize that it's the teachers in this field right now, from my point of view, who are the experts. Not me, not Richard Gerber, not Ewan McIntosh, but the teachers. And tonight, I'm just the messenger. I'm going to show you what teachers have done. Well, maybe I can help you stand back and get a sense of what's going on, how this works, how you might do things like this yourselves. But the this comes from the teachers whose classrooms we're going to look at. So, the way I want to start with some concepts, some ideas. And you know these ideas because these started popping up, okay, about 1 minute after midnight in the year 2000 also. And that is that we need to stop emphasizing just content in our teaching. We need to elevate important kinds of skills for students that in traditional schooling don't really get emphasized. And these are skills that students need. Thinking, communication, collaboration. Especially collaboration. Now, you know, even way back in the 1980s, people were stressing the idea that we need to start putting students together in good collaborative groups and help them start learning together and give up the idea that we should be the center of the classroom, we teachers, and students should just be there passively receiving information that they give back to us on tests. Because that's the old way of teaching. And I must say, in the work I've done in Spain, you know, when I go to a school, I meet teachers, and most teachers say to me, and they feel they can say it to me, they say the old way of teaching, which is focused primarily on memory and rote learning, and that's the way we learn to teach, doesn't work. Students are not really learning what we hope they are learning, and they're especially not learning things that have an impact on their lives outside of school. And many teachers actually say to me, that system of teaching is a dismal failure. It just doesn't work. Okay? And now I find that interesting because along with it goes the question, but what can we do instead that will work? And that's the way a lot of people feel. So and that's where I have said, well, maybe I can help you, because I've been working with teachers since the 1970s. And I've been working in classrooms, and we've been trying out a lot of things, and there are things now that do work in those classrooms, and we've tried to sort of meld them together so that now there is a way to not just focus on individual students in classrooms, but focus on whole schools so that we can transform schools into good learning communities. Okay? So maybe I can help and I can show you, okay, things that teachers have done to make that happen. And that's basically, again, what I want to do today. So, thinking, communication, collaboration. We're going to focus on thinking. I could tell you some interesting stories about communication and collaboration. Okay, well, actually, I will tell you one of them. I know some of you have heard this story, but it's an interesting one because collaboration. Okay, well, we know that in the world that students are going to go into, most of the things they do are not going to be hermits working alone. They're going to be working with others, and they need to learn how to collaborate. And that means they're not going to be doing all the work themselves. There's going to be sharing, exchanging, good communication, etc. Well, when I went to school, okay, the teachers that taught me had just the opposite view. In fact, I remember, and I'm going to show you some pictures of those old classrooms in which there were seats, okay, in a row, bolted to the floor so we couldn't move them around. And one of the rules was no talking. And that doesn't mean just talking to the teacher, no talking to other students. And I remember one day I was in a classroom, and it was when I was in, I think, the 8th or 9th grade in school, and it was a history classroom. And the teacher was a good teacher. I was learning something from the teacher. Well, one day the teacher was writing something on the blackboard. So he turned around and he wrote, and he said something. And I usually sat in the back of the room, and I didn't hear what he said. So I turned to the student sitting next to me and I said, "What did he just say?" And the teacher heard me. And the teacher turned around and he said, "Who said that?" And I never lied, even when I was a kid. And so I said I did. And I was about to tell him that I didn't hear what he said. And he looked at me and he said, "Out!" And he kicked me out of the classroom. I had to go outside and stand in the hall for an hour until this class was done. Okay? And, the sad thing was I never ever found out what that teacher said in that classroom. Okay? Now, we know that we have to learn how to work with other people. And we know that you do that in school. You teach students how to work with other students, okay, on the football field, but not in the classroom. Okay, well, that's different now because many people do. And we've learned the techniques of collaborative work and collaborative learning. so that we teach students how to share, work together, and come back with sort of group reports, and that's nice. Okay, and we're happy that things have changed. But back then, okay, it was different. How many of you went to school and one of the rules was you couldn't talk to other students? Okay, tell us. Put your hands up, everybody who has. A lot of hands. Okay, and many of you are teachers. How many of you now work in ways that help students talk together and learn together? Put your hands up. Okay, now some of you are not putting your hands up, okay, but that's something you can learn to do. And you learn to do it well, and you have really wonderful results. Well, let's look at that. So what I want to focus on is not communication and collaboration. There's been a lot that's been done, but thinking. Because that's part of this trio, and that's something that a lot of people who say we need to help students learn better thinking can't really talk much about. If you ask, well, what does that mean? How can we do that in the classroom? Many people who say this are evasive. They say, well, we need to teach students to be critical thinkers. And if you ask, what does that mean? They say, well, put them together and let them talk together and they'll be critical thinkers. Okay, and we know that doesn't really work. And so there aren't really many answers that we're given by people who tell us this. And of course, they're quite right, because thinking is tremendously important. In fact, you'll see that from my point of view, thinking is what needs to drive learning. Okay? They're not two separate things. So let's look at this now. And I want to focus on the concept of skillful thinking, and think about learning and teaching, okay, in that context. So now often people say to me when I talk about thinking, teaching thinking, they say, teaching thinking? Why do we have to teach thinking? Doesn't everybody think? And of course everybody does think, right? There's not a person in this room who doesn't think. And in fact, you were thinking when you were 5 years old. You were thinking when you were 2 years old. You were thinking when you were born. And we know that as teachers, we don't teach students things that they can already do. We teach them things that they need our help to learn how to do, because they can't really learn much on their own. So it looks like thinking isn't one of those. So why teach thinking? Now, when I fly a lot, and when I'm on airplanes, I like to talk to people sitting next to me. And often they ask me, what do you do? And I say, well, I'm the director of the Center for Teaching Thinking. And then that question comes up, thinking? You know, doesn't everybody think? Okay. Well, let's reflect on that for a minute, because certainly everybody does. So why teach thinking? Well, let's think about this now. Okay? Now, you probably haven't seen this particular ad, but you've seen many ads for automobiles. In fact, every day of our lives we see ads like that. We see ads like that, we see ads like this for breakfast cereal. Okay? And we know that companies that produce these ads, okay, pay a lot of money for these ads. If this runs on television, or if it's in a magazine, it could cost 10,000 euros to run a stream of these ads. And we know that these companies are not stupid. They know that these ads they're going to come out ahead. That these ads will get people to buy these products, and they'll sell enough to not only cover the 10,000 euros, but to make more of a profit. Okay? And they know that because they know how people react to them. And that's been well researched too. Because sure, I'm sure that there are some people in this audience who maybe are thinking about buying an automobile, but most of us are not. So an ad like this is not going to get you to run down and buy this automobile. Right? But what happens? What's the phenomenon? Well, this one too, breakfast cereal. I mean, if you buy breakfast cereal, it's probably going to be sooner than you buy an automobile, but not right now. So what happens? Well, what all the research shows is very clear. The research shows that you see an ad like this, maybe you're eating your breakfast or you're talking to somebody, but the images register, maybe some of the words, okay? And you don't really think much about it, but they get in your head and they stay there. Not that you're aware of these images all the time, but they're there. And then when you go shopping for a breakfast cereal, you have to buy breakfast cereal for your family because they've run out. Okay, what happens? Well, you get to the breakfast cereal section of your supermarket. Do you only see one breakfast cereal there? No. How many? A lot. And you look at them and you say, oh, and then you say, oh, Honey Smacks, there it is. And you buy it without thinking much about it. And that's true of automobiles as well as breakfast cereal. That the images stay, they're familiar, you don't want to think much about it. You say, looks good to me, and I'll buy it. I remember a friend of mine actually, needed a new sofa for her living room. And she went to a store to buy a sofa. And she said, I don't like to shop. So she went in, she said there were 3 sofas in the showroom. And I looked at one of them and I didn't like it. I didn't like the fabric that covered the pillows. And the second one, I didn't like the lines. The third one, oh, that was wonderful. So I said, I'll buy it. Okay? And she bought it. All right? And so she said to me, now look. And she took me into her living room. And there was the sofa. But it was sitting diagonally across the living room. And I said, why is it there? And she said, it doesn't fit. Okay? It's too long, too big. Okay? And I said, oh, well, you didn't think about that? And she said, well, I know, I should have thought about it, but I didn't. Okay? And I said, well, why don't you return it? And she said, I can't. Okay? She said, I can return it, but I said, I really can't because it was on sale. And it said, if you buy this in the sale, you can't return it. So she said, I'm going to have to put it on eBay or something. Okay? Well, but she realized she could have figured out how long this sofa had to be beforehand. She could have thought about it. She could have gone down, measured them, and picked one that does fit. But she didn't. And that's what happens with these ads. Okay? So while everybody thinks, not everybody thinks as carefully and as well as they could. And these are just examples, and we know that. In fact, I want to say something even more dramatic, because I happen to think that 95% of the people on this planet do not think very well. They don't think very carefully. Okay, they make snap decisions. Many they regret later. Sometimes things they decide turn into disasters. Sometimes they're okay, but then they're lucky. They haven't really thought very well. And I also want to say that that's because of the way they were taught in school. They were never taught strategies for thinking carefully, for making good decisions. They were never taught how to solve problems. They were taught how to memorize things, and they fell into the trap that most students fall into, in that you memorize things teachers tell you, you read in your textbooks, you take notes, you memorize them, and you do that. Why? Well, you have to do it because you're going to be tested. The tests are going to come, they're going to say, who was the 3rd king of Spain? And you have to remember. And if you remember, you get it right. And if you get it right, you can go on to the next test and the next grade. And many students say to me, well, isn't that what school is all about? You memorize things, you pass the tests, and then you get out of school and you go to the real world. Okay? Now, I think we all think that in school we need to teach students things that have an impact on their lives in the real world. and aren't different from what they learn. And yet, there is a lot of research now that shows, shockingly, that about 80 to 90% of what we teach students in school has no impact on their lives outside of school. And yet, we've spent time teaching them, they've learned these things, they passed their tests. Now, let me test this out. Because in Spain, I think, like in the United States, and you have to learn mathematics. And in mathematics, you have to learn algebra. And in algebra, you learn about quadratic equations. Remember those? And we all learned how to solve them. How many of you have ever had to solve a quadratic equation in your life outside of school? Anybody? Put your hand up. Now, there's always one person in the audience that does that, and that's right. In fact, I'm surprised there aren't more. We have a big audience. Okay, now maybe that's not fair. That's a kind of selected example, but think about how much your students have learned in school and how the tests they've passed and whether they actually have use for what they're learning. Now, they should, but because of the way they learn, they don't. Because the learning they're doing, the content, becomes for students only a vehicle for passing those tests. Pass one test, you go on to the next. Okay? And that's what a lot of teachers say to me they recognize in education. And it's got to stop, but they don't know how to stop it. So let's think about that now. And let's just recognize what's going on. Well, I've done a little bit of sort of surface research with a friend of mine named David Perkins from Harvard, and we really tried to figure out the kinds of problems that people have with their thinking. And I mean, it's clear, it's superficial, you make hasty judgments and decisions without thinking much. Maybe they're very one-sided, you like this thing, so you don't care about anything else, you just go for it. Okay. Not clear, fuzzy thinking, disorganized. Well, disorganized is easy. I mean, you think about one thing, leads you to think about something else, but you don't have any organization to your ideas. But the next to the last one, fuzzy, okay? I mean, that's a really good example of that one. I remember I was doing a workshop in a high school, and I had finished the workshop, and it was in the United States, and I was leaving to go to my car to drive home, and outside the front door of the school was a bench. And on the bench, there were about 6 boys sitting there. And as I walked by, I heard them talking, and one of them stood up and said, "Let's not just sit here, let's go do it." And I thought, oh, interesting. And then another student stood up and said, "Do what?" And the first student said, "Oh, I don't know, let's just go do it." And they all left. And to this day, I wondered what they went to do. Okay, well, I thought that was not very clear. All right. Well, anyhow, when do these things happen? In our lives, they happen every single day of our lives. And you just reflect on it. And they happen when you do different kinds of thinking. When you make decisions, solve problems, make predictions, you listen to arguments that people give you, you think, even when you compare and contrast things, you don't think very deeply, and many other kinds of everyday thinking. And if we recognize that, then with regard to thinking and education, we recognize that the only kind of thinking we really are teaching students to do well most of the time is remember things. But what about all these other things? Okay? And that should get us going, because to me, that should be part of our mission. To help students not just learn how to remember things so they can do well on a quiz show, but learn how to think carefully when they make decisions, learn how to solve problems, identify problems, and solve them. Not just guess. So that they're really much more productive than they usually are in their lives. So our mission is according to what I'm saying here, is to help students learn how to do these things well, do them better. Most of the time when we do them, it's pretty sloppy. And often we don't do them well, and sometimes it doesn't matter, but a lot of times it does. You lose money, you lose friends. Sometimes bad decisions lead to tragedy that could have been avoided. So let's figure out how we can teach students to do these things better. So that's the first big point I want to make. And I want to stress it because now, not only in Spain, but a lot of other countries, there are lots of people who are jumping on the teaching thinking bandwagon, and they're visiting schools and they're saying, well, I'm going to show you what you need to do to help students be thinkers. And some of these projects, they show you how to help students connect dots so that they see patterns and things, or ask questions. Okay, what does that make you wonder? Okay, or develop some habits like stick to the task, persist, listening well, and those are all important, but they're not going to help you be good decision makers and problem solvers. They may contribute to that, but let's keep our eye on the target here. And what I like is that the teachers I'm going to show you their work, are teachers who are focused on that. So how can we help people avoid those mistakes? Okay, well, let's look at this again. And let's do a little activity. Let's do one of these. Okay, and now I'm going to ask you to do some thinking. I'm going to ask you to imagine you have gone to the supermarket and your family has run out of breakfast cereal. And the message they've given you is, buy a new breakfast cereal, not the same one, buy something, that's good and bring it home for us. So there you are, you face the breakfast cereals and you see this and you say, wait a minute, there are some things I need to think about before I buy this. So I'm going to ask you to do a little activity. 1 minute. I want you to turn to your partners and I want you to try to formulate some questions, the answers to which will help you decide whether you want to buy this cereal. They give you some information, but they don't give you other information that many of us think is important. So what's important? Do it. Now, talk to your partners. What would you want to find out about this breakfast cereal? Tell them. Talk loud, noise. Okay, let's come back together. Back together, everybody. Now that was a quickie, but I'm sure you've come up with a lot of things. Let's hear one thing that you identify that you want to find out about this breakfast cereal before you bought it. Somebody just say it. Okay. The ingredients. What about the ingredients? What in particular might you want to find out about the ingredients? Sugar. How much sugar? How many of you thought of that? Put your hands up. Well, of course. Okay, now, for all you know, this is 99% sugar with a little bit of coating on the outside to make it look different. Okay, you don't know that. And if you found that out, would you buy it? No. Well, maybe you like sugar, okay? But maybe somebody in your family has diabetes, and you have to think carefully about that. Okay? Now that was easy. You did a little bit of thinking. Let's hear one other thing. What else would you want to find out? Price. Doesn't tell you the price. Now, it's not going to cost 100 euros, but it may be more expensive than the other cereal, and it may have a lot of sugar, and you may think, and it may not, there may not be much of it in the carton, and you may think, well, if I think about the others too, this other one is probably a better deal for me than this one. Okay? Now, what are you doing when you do this? First of all, where are you getting those ideas? Where are they coming from? You have to go and, look at your iPhones and ask, what should we find out about breakfast cereal? No. Where do they come from? Experience. From experience. Now, how does experience give you the idea that it's important to find out about sugar in breakfast cereal? When did you have that experience? The experience of the importance of sugar in breakfast cereal. Not this morning, not yesterday, not the day before, but it's experience that you've accumulated in your life. Okay? So that maybe you had, a range of experience with the importance of sugar in breakfast cereal 10 years ago. How come you thought of it today? What does experience do? It gets that idea where? Where did it come from today? Sugar is important. Where was it that you drew it out of you? Come on, you all know. Okay. Did you have in your pocket a piece of paper that said sugar is important to find out about breakfast cereal? No. Did you go to the internet, and you entered breakfast cereal? No. Where did it come from? Come on, tell me. Your heads. Okay, you're accessing information that you've got in your brains that you don't think about every day, but you're calling it up, it's relevant, and it's helping you do more careful thinking. Okay. Now, I like to stress that because that's really the kind of learning that we all want students to be able to do. We all want them to be able to build on things they've already learned and learn and understand new things based on that. We want them to be able to access what's in their heads and use it. Okay, and I do this because, as simple as it is, this is a model of what you need to do in your classrooms to help your students to become better thinkers. But you need to do it in a way that isn't focused just on a particular example, okay, but that is more general and has more general application. So buying a breakfast cereal, when you buy a breakfast cereal, what kind of thinking are you doing? You're making a what? A decision. You're looking at all these and saying, I'm going to buy this one. Okay? If you base your decision on the way it looks, and that's all, you're not thinking very carefully. But if you stop and say, wait a minute, let me think about some other things I need to really find out about this breakfast cereal, then you're broadening your thinking. You're saying, I need to get some more information before I buy this cereal. Okay? And that means you're thinking more carefully. You're thinking about what's going to happen if you buy the cereal and you eat it in your family. You're thinking about the results. If there's a lot of sugar, well, if you keep eating it and eating it, you're going to get bigger and bigger. Okay? Or there may be some medical problems. Okay? So you're starting to think about the consequences of purchasing this. And that's a good idea to think about anything, right? I mean, if you have teenage children, you say to them almost every week, think about the consequences of what you're doing. Now, we shouldn't mean just bad consequences. Let's think about whether there are going to be good or bad consequences before we decide. So we're developing an idea about what we have to do to be a good thinker. And you'll see that that's really the basic idea that all of these teachers have shared. So, the way this is described in the literature is that we're going to teach students thinking skills. They're going to learn some skills, okay, like you just tapped into, in their thinking, that will help them be better thinkers. So they won't just be guessing, they won't make mistakes, like my friend on the sofa, okay? Now that doesn't guarantee that they're going to make the best decisions, because sometimes things happen that you don't know about, but at least you'll be doing the best you can as a person to try to figure out what the best thing to do is, and you apply that to all of the other kinds of thinking, okay, your quality of your thinking is going to go up, and you'll have many more successes. So what's a thinking skill? Well, be careful, because people go around and say, I'm going to show you how to teach thinking skills. And they say, well, have students make decisions and solve problems. But that doesn't work, because you know that when you make decisions that may not be very skillful, you may make a bad decision. You may not think very carefully. So it isn't decision making. What we need to learn about and what we need to teach our students is how to do these things with skills. And they need us as teachers to teach them. They make decisions all the time. But how to make them carefully and well, we can help them. And I like to compare this to swimming. Okay? How many of you swim? Put your hands up. Now, come on, everybody should put your hand up. There's probably nobody who's ever not been in the water. Okay, how many of you are Olympic athletes? Swim like in the Olympics? Whoa, so there's a difference here. Well, I'll tell you another little story, because when I was a kid, again in school, we changed grades. I went to a higher grade, and in that higher grade, we had a physical education requirement. And we had to choose a sport. And I chose swimming, because I like swimming, and I've been watching these people swim, and win the races and all that. So, and I remember the first day I went to the school swimming pool, and the teacher said, get in the pool, okay, and swim. So we got in the pool, and I thought, well, I'm going to swim. So I started swimming, and within 2 minutes, less than that, a minute, I had to stop, put my head up, and breathe. I go, and I thought, wait a minute, something is wrong here. I should be able to swim. And I remember the teacher came over to me and said, I noticed you were having a little bit of trouble with your breathing. He said, and let me just show you something. And he showed me how I can synchronize my breathing with my strokes, so that I don't have to stop and breathe. And I did, and it was wonderful, because I could get across the swimming pool. Couldn't get back yet, but still, at least I made it across. Okay. Now, I became a more skillful swimmer. I learned to swim more skillfully. The teacher taught me how to do it. So that swimming was not a skill, but swimming well is what I was really trying to do. Swimming with accuracy and precision. Okay, so that's the same with thinking. Everybody makes decisions, but making decisions, going through that process carefully and with skill, well, that's something you can learn, and all your students can learn it. Everybody in this room can learn it. All the people on this planet can learn it. It's not hard. But when you're faced with advertising all the time that gets you used to looking at an image and saying, I like that, and going out to buy it, well, you've got to overcome those habits. And we'll see what teachers have done to do that. Now, how have they done it? Well, there are two models. One is in a separate course in school. You have a thinking course from Friday from 9 to 9:50 every morning, every week. That's when you learn thinking. Okay? Now, what do the students say? The students say, well, that's when we do our thinking. 9 to 9:50 Friday morning. All the other time, we do all those other things. Okay? And that's what happens, and that's also well researched. That students who learn thinking skills, how to think skillfully, in separate programs rarely, if ever, transfer and use what they learn in their other courses, in their other academic work. Their other academic work, they're memorizing things still. Okay? Now, the other technique is what I call infusion. And that's what I first saw teachers doing in their classroom. So we want to take a look at that. How does it work? What happens when you not only have as a goal try to help students to be better thinkers, roughly in the way I've really sketched, okay, but you want to help them use the good thinking skills that you're teaching them to think about the content curriculum that they're learning, to think about the important things in the curriculum, and not just memorize things. And that actually is now a little more detail about what thinking-based learning is. It's using thinking, skillful thinking, higher order thinking skills, not just memory, to think about things in the curriculum, so that students are thinking about not just, what were the dates of the French Revolution, but what caused the French Revolution? And nobody's telling them. They're using some skill at trying to find out what causes things to try to really understand what was behind the revolution. Okay? And what was the impact? What could you expect, okay, if a revolution like that happened? Okay, what could the Third Estate, okay, that's the group that really stormed the Bastille, etc. Okay, now what could they have predicted was going to be a result of doing that? And was that a good prediction? Okay, I remember working with a teacher who was doing that with students in her classroom, and it was about a couple of years ago. It was at the time when there were protests in Hong Kong, and there was a group that was demanding that the government, changed and became a little more democratic. And one of the students stood up and said, I wonder if those people are asking the same question that these folks in the Third Estate asked before they decided to storm the Bastille. Because if they thought, if they stormed the Bastille, the king would gather his all troops together and kill them all, they might think twice about whether that was a good idea. And the student said, I wonder if that's what those people in Hong Kong are thinking about. If they decide to put more pressure on the government, are they going to call in the troops and do what happened in Tiananmen Square in China? Now, I thought these students are now learning something about the French Revolution, that they're interpreting present events that way. How many times has that happened? Okay. How does it work? Let's take a look at some of the techniques. Okay? Now, what I'm going to show you is going to involve a change from a traditional, I would say 19th century, but certainly 20th century up to after World War II classroom, where students are passive receivers of information. Okay? Now, I don't want to tell you how old I am, but I do want to tell you that I remember classrooms like this in my school when I was a kid. Okay? Now, these seats were bolted to the floor. Okay? They had teachers up on a platform, and this was it. So, we're going to see a change to student-centered classrooms in which students become more active learners. Okay? And the learning is driven by the thinking that they're learning to do. And that's the difference. So how does that work? Well, first, co-construct a strategy for good thinking. Let's stick with decision making, okay? And let's think about that. What is it that we really should think about? What questions are important to ask and answer before you make a decision? What do you need to find out? And don't say about the sugar in the breakfast cereal. That's just an example. Let's generalize it, okay? Now, the question we usually ask is, what should I do? But let's think about this. Which road is the best road to take? Should we go to the right or go to the left? What do you think? Now, what do you see here? You see two roads. You see this one, you don't know where it's going. This one, you know there's light there, so, you know, no more trees. Okay, light at the end of the tunnel. Which is the better road? Can you decide? What do you need to find out before you decide? Where the road is going. So you need to start by asking, why do I have to make this decision? What am I aiming at? Well, suppose that your grandmother, who lives way off there somewhere, behind the trees, maybe, 10 or 15 kilometers away, has invited you for her birthday party. It's going to be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So then, you've got to focus. Well, let's make that the first question. What is it that I have to make a decision about? But then, what are you going to ask now about these roads? What will you try to find out about either one? If you're going to your grandmother's, you don't want to disappoint her, you want to get there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, it's now, 12:30. Okay. What do you need to find out before you decide?
Which one is the shortest?
Which one is
Shortest road?
the shortest road to your grandmother's? So that means, if you break that up, that means first you need to find out, does it lead to my grandmother's? Because you may find out, you may think about this road and you may find, well, you look at a map and it goes this way and this way, your grandmother's over there, but all of a sudden it turns and it goes to the airport. Well, maybe that's not the best road. Okay, so you explore this one and you find this one goes, but then it turns and goes to the airport too. Are you stuck? You can't get to your grandmother's? What else would you want to find out? These are two ways. Is there... Tell me. Is there another way? Well, so you ask, what options do I have here? Let me think about either, and then let me see where they go. Now, does the distance to your grandmother, is that the only thing you need to think about? The distance? You're in your car. You're driving there. Okay. One of them you realize is shorter than the other. There may be two of them that lead to your grandmother's. What else do you need to find out? Well, let me tell you. Certainly, here's, a clearing, but maybe there are man-eating tigers there, and you got to watch out. Or maybe not man-eating tigers. Maybe there's a hole in the road, okay, and you can't get through. Maybe there's construction. So you need to find out all of those things that are related to how fast you can get to your grandmother's, okay? So for each of these options, you need to think about the consequences. And in order to think about the consequences, you need to get some information. So you're going to now get out of your head the things you need to find out, and that will help you to find them out. Then you can make a better decision. Okay? But you're not going to guess before you find those things out. So here is a list of questions. A strategy for skillful decision making. It's a list of questions that was developed in a classroom by a teacher and the students. And they agreed these questions, we need to ask and answer these questions before we make a decision. Otherwise, we run the risk of missing something and making a bad decision. And they all agree it doesn't guarantee you're making the best decision, because maybe something has happened that you don't know about. But still, you're doing everything you can to find out. Okay? Does this make sense to you? How many of you think, if you look at this, if you operated this way, if you asked and answered these questions before you had to make an important decision, how many of you would feel confident that you've done what you really need to do to decide which house you're going to buy, or what automobile you're going to buy, or where you're going to go on a trip, or who you're going to marry? Okay? Be a good idea to think about these things? Okay, well this is now the first step, okay? But not every classroom operates that way. Because if these are younger kids, if they're in kindergarten, first grade, and you ask them, they're not going to say, well, we ought to think about the consequences of our options. No. They'll use their own language, and it's a good idea to keep that language there, because the idea is you and the students are going to generate a strategy for more skillful decision making. You're going to post it somewhere, and the students are going to use it to guide them so that they get in the habit of asking and answering these questions when they make decisions. And then they're going to be like the swimmer, like me. Okay, learning how to breathe when I swam. But it's going to be more important, because these decisions are going to be important decisions. And if you start children when they're very young, and they start with a simpler approach, and then as they go up through the grades, it gets more sophisticated. By the time they get to 5th and 6th grade, they won't have to rely on this anymore. It's going to be in their heads, and they will this will be the way they operate. This will be as natural as eating and breathing. And wouldn't that be wonderful? And if they grow up and become leaders someday, okay, and you know that they know how to think and make decisions carefully and well, and consider the impact of those decisions not just on themselves but on everybody else, you're going to feel a little better about the country you live in. Okay, now maybe that's a dream that I have, but okay, it's there. So, compare and contrast. Same thing. Let's think about that. When you ask students to compare and contrast, what do you ask them to think about? Here are two objects. How are they what? Tell me. Anybody? You, tell me. How are they what? When they compare and contrast. You must, you know. You'll be embarrassed when you find out. Okay? When you ask students to compare and contrast, you ask them to think about how are these two things what? Similar, and how are they different? You embarrassed? Yes. Okay. Now that's all we do. And sometimes we have a little graphic organizer for them to use, where they put similarities in the middle and the differences on the outside. Well, that's not real comparing and contrasting. Okay? That's not enough. And I want to say, you folks compare and contrast things in your lives. You never, ever, 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 ever just list similarities and differences when you compare and contrast things. You do more. And yet we don't ask students to do more. What do? Suppose you're thinking about what to watch on TV, simple thing like that. And you're comparing and contrasting two things that are coming up, a football game, okay, and a movie you've wanted to see for years. And you list the similarities and differences. Do you stop there? Do you say, well, I've got similarities and differences, period? Are you finished? What do you do then? You make a decision. You try to come to a conclusion. You say, well, I guess this is the one that's really, that I'm really gravitating towards and that I think I can learn more from, so I'll do it. Okay? And maybe the football game, because maybe football is your thing. Okay? Now you think about it. You're buying a house. You've narrowed down to 2 houses. And you're comparing and contrasting them. Do you just list similarities and differences? No, that list is very confusing. You try to sort out the similarities and differences. You try to figure out which are important and which are not important. And then, based on the important ones, you draw a conclusion. You say, well, this one has more important characteristics than this one does. So that's the one. So you have a reason for your conclusion based on the similarities and differences. So, how are they alike? How are they different? Which are important? Any big, priorities here? And then what conclusion can you come to? Now, you may think that's sort of trivial. But I'm going to show you some examples and you realize that unless you push students to those last 3 questions, and they just stop at similarities and differences, they're not learning things that they could learn. And it's just taking those steps that makes a difference. Now, you can teach students to do good thinking using these thinking strategies, but find something important in the curriculum that they can think about using skillful decision making, using skillful comparing and contrasting. And then they're not only going to learn how to do those things well, but they're going to learn in more depth and detail what they should be learning about the content curriculum. For example, let's get students thinking about energy sources. Now we know in the world people are trying to decide what's the best energy source for our country to rely on, or our region to rely on. And that may vary from place to place. Okay? But we rely on petroleum now. And everybody is saying, well, now wait a minute. Petroleum, you use it, it pollutes. There's global warming, there are some pretty bad consequences. And maybe next week it's going to run out and we'll be stuck. So let's think about it now. And we know people are doing that because we know there are windmills around that weren't there 30 years ago. Solar panels on the roofs of houses. People are trying these things out. Well, let's get the students now to apply their strategy for skillful decision making to this question. And I want to show you an example. But first, who's this? Who? Napoleon. Okay, you can tell by this, right? Okay, well, now in history, students study history. History is not just a series of events. History is shaped by decisions that leaders make. And we know that they don't always make good decisions. Sometimes the decisions they make are disastrous. So, you now become Napoleon. You've been challenged by Wellington for a showdown at Waterloo. What's the best thing to do? Should you rise to the challenge? Should you say, well, I'm not sure I have enough cannons, so maybe we'll do it another time? What should you do? Well, you get the students thinking about that, and they can only make decisions based on what people knew at that time in that historical period. Well, they're learning history in a much different way with greater depth and detail. You're Julius Caesar, and there's the Rubicon. What are you going to do? Well, you got to think about the consequences. Okay, think about your different options. Okay, so you apply that to history. Or this. Now, I don't know if you know, there's a little book written by a famous author in the U.S. who's not alive anymore called Dr. Seuss, called Horton Hatches the Egg. It's about a little elephant who, you know, is a nice elephant and decides he's going to help a bird who wants to go off and have a good time at the beach by agreeing to sit on the bird's egg until the egg hatches in the tree. And all sorts of things happen. And Horton has to decide what to do when it rains, when it freezes. But when the hunters come, what should he do? Well, you become Horton. What's the best thing to do? Well, in any story that students read, from children's stories to Anna Karenina, characters make decisions. You become that character. Think about what you know about the other characters, what you can predict will happen if you do this or that. And your reading skills are going to go way up. And you're going to be able to defend your choices. Say, no, Anna Karenina, at this point in the story, she made not a good decision. I think the best thing for her to do is so-and-so, and the reasons are such and such, and I'm going to write an essay about it. Okay. All right? Compare and contrast. Well, this is a natural one, because we know most students will go for the left rather than the right. Okay, fast foods versus Mediterranean foods. But let's compare and contrast them and not just list similarities and differences. Okay, let's think about which is the best kind of food to eat. Okay. In secondary, animal cells and plant cells. It's a natural for compare and contrast. Okay, what can we learn about these cells? Democracy and totalitarianism. Again, secondary. This is now upper primary. Compare and contrast this wonderful Velázquez painting with Picasso's version of it. Let's not just come up with similarities and differences. Let's see what we can learn about the difference in style, maybe in what the artist was trying to accomplish, etc. Okay. These are little kids now in the first grade. Differences between living in the country and living in the city. And they have specific examples. And they're thinking about this. Okay, now, that's engaging the students in using some good thinking skills to think about content. How do they do it? Well, okay, break them up into groups. Have them work together and discuss these things together. And you've seen many examples like this. I'm just going to show you a run of them. The teacher. Students are working in groups. I've been in classrooms with teachers who can't stop talking. And it disrupts the thinking of the students. This teacher is giving them what's called wait time. Is saying, I'm going to give them time to think this stuff through. Because he knows the research. The research shows that most teachers ask questions. But most teachers who ask questions wait about 2 seconds and then they answer their own questions. And that doesn't give the kids a chance to think. So let's slow down, let's stop, let's give them a chance to work together. Okay? Even these little kids. Okay? But they're not just going to be sitting and talking together. They're going to be applying skillful thinking. And that means maybe the strategy is on the wall, but there's another device now that was generated by some teachers and some students and teachers that everybody uses because it works so well, using a graphic organizer. So let's write down our ideas. Here is about energy, the best energy source. Well, what are your options for energy sources? And you can, if you can't read it in the back, well, nuclear, solar, etc. But animal power, human power, maybe we can pass a law on this planet that requires every human being to get on a treadmill and spin it around for an hour every day. That came from one of the students. He said, maybe that'll give us all the energy we need. Or maybe not, but let's find out. Okay, so creative options. And then what do you need to think about an energy source to help you decide whether it's a good one? And this is now coming from the experience and prior knowledge of the students. How much it costs, effect on the environment, okay? So now this is all coming out explicitly, and the students are working together, but now they're working together driven by this strategy using graphic organizers. And here's the group working on wind, and you can't read this, but these are the different factors: cost, impact on the environment. They're judging whether these count against or in favor of wind, and how important they are. They put a star if they think these are really important. So maybe safety, maybe pollution is more important than cost. So we have to give it more weight. So they're trying to make a careful decision. And then the different groups of students put all this together. Now, I can't read that. So certainly you can't read it, but it doesn't matter. Because when I first saw this in a classroom, where the teacher had given the students a week to try to go and get the information they needed to make a good decision, I came back and I thought, it's never going to happen. But they really got into it. And they put all the information they got on this matrix so that every student could go and look at it and compare these different options. I mean, this kind of blew me away. I thought, look at how much these students have learned about energy and energy sources in 1 week. I thought they probably know more about this now than anybody else in the school, including all the teachers. Okay? And they then make a decision. They don't always agree. They have to be prepared to explain why. And if they disagree, let's put them together. Have an open mind, listen to each other, because maybe your partner, who has a different point of view from you, has discovered something that you missed. So be open-minded, and it's okay to change your mind to find out something new. And I thought, this is great. I mean, this came from a teacher. And I show this to all the teachers I work with now, and they all bring this into their classrooms. They say this is a way to help students to learn to talk together when you have a difference of opinion. Try to understand each other. Be prepared to change your mind. And don't just go and fight about it. And even now we're going to translate this into writing. Now you're going to take the information that you've gathered, and I'm going to ask you to write a report to the government recommending a good energy source. Okay? Now, there are some little maneuvers that can be made to help students do this well, and you can't read this, but here's a 2-page report. And what happens, this student says, well, we have a lot of options here for energy sources. And I'm going to go through some of the major ones. So this is about the pros and cons of one. This is another. Okay? And then his option and his conclusion. And he explains why he thinks his is the best. So it's well-organized writing according to the organization of the thinking. These are students now. Horton is facing the hunters. They're using a simpler graphic organizer. Okay. What are his options? Now look at some of these. Okay. Run away with the egg. Run away without the egg. Fight the hunters. Talk to them. Tell them what you're doing. I'm protecting this egg, so please don't hurt me. You know, I mean, these are little kids coming up with all these ideas. And where are they getting them? They're getting them from their own experience. So they're learning how to learn, not just by memorizing, but by drawing upon other things that they know. And that's going to stick with them for the rest of their lives. If they start in kindergarten, first grade and continue doing this, that's the way they're going to learn things, okay, when they're 50 years old and they have to find out something. Okay, what are the results? Well, Horton will escape, but Maisie the bird isn't going to be very happy because the egg will be dead, etc. So, which is more important? Well, they decide Horton shouldn't run away because the egg will die and he will have broken his promise to Maisie. I thought, it's amazing. These children are now thinking keeping a promise is important, more than saving your life. Okay? But how could that be? Well, in this book, every page of the book, the author has the elephant saying, well, I made a promise to Maisie, so I've got to keep it. Okay? So, interesting. Compare and contrast. Here's a graphic organizer that can be used. This is the traditional similarities and differences. Now, any big ideas and conclusion. And this is from a Valencia classroom. It's in their textbooks. The students are comparing and contrasting using a graphic organizer. Same thing. And now they're drawing a conclusion. And I just want to tell you about this one, because this one is interesting. I think you can read it. These kids, okay, notice that one of the differences between animal cells and plant cells is that plant cells have very rigid walls, whereas animal cells have more flexible walls. And they thought together, I wonder why that is. And one student said, I got an idea. Maybe plant cells have rigid walls because they can stack on each other and the plants can get closer to the sun for photosynthesis. And animals, well, they have to move around. So maybe that's why their cells have flexible walls. Okay. Then one of the other students said, well, you don't really know, that's just a theory. Okay, and I thought, my God, I mean, what are these students discovering? They're really starting to do science on their own, coming up with an explanatory theory to explain why these cells are different, and they realize it. And the teacher said, why don't you go find out everything else you can find out about these cells. Go to the internet, see what you can find out, and see if anybody else holds this view. So these students went off and they did a tremendous amount of research. And they came back saying, yes, a lot of people say the same thing. And they're older than us. And I thought, now these students started by having plant cell and animal cell. And if they just listed similarities and differences, you get a lot of technical details. But now they've drawn out some ideas. And these ideas have got them thinking. And now they're really engaged in more learning because of that. And if you don't draw out the conclusions, they just have similarities and differences, you'll never get this. This one. Okay, now these are the kids. Okay, and they're smiling, I think, not because of the lesson, but because they saw me taking their photo. Okay, but still, here's what they came up with. Simpler, they're younger, but they're focusing on nutrition. Okay? And we would hope that's going to motivate them to have more varied Mediterranean diets than eat hamburgers and hot dogs. Okay? These students are working on democracy and totalitarianism. These are kids in Chile in a classroom in which they have a big graphic organizer. They have things they're reading, and they're trying to work together and put the information on the graphic organizer. These students are using their tablets to get information. This happens to be a different thinking skill, judging the reliability of sources of information, a very important critical thinking skill. In fact, that's a thinking skill that I happen to feel is the most important skill you can teach students. Because if they're going to get information on the internet, then they usually do what most people do. They go to Google, they find something, they copy it, they bring it into school, and they don't think about, is this a reliable source? Is this somebody trying to sell something? Maybe distorting. So you can teach students how to judge reliability of sources before they accept information. Great, important skill. Okay. And now, of course, the groups are finished. They're reporting to the class because the class is becoming a thinking classroom, not just the groups. And the class is going to have a chance to discuss, raise questions. This is a group of students who actually, they departed from the curriculum because they had a big problem with bullying in the school. And this is now, there's an issue about bullying of a particular student in the school, and they're trying to decide what to do. Okay? What to do about this. And there are lots of different options. You know, they know who's doing the bullying, so go beat them up, kick them out of school. I mean, what should you do? Try to convince him to stop? Talk to his parents? So they're considering these and they're writing, okay? So that they end up with something like this for all the students to see, and now all the students can think about, you know, which option they think is best. Okay? Now this is a classroom in a school in New York City. It's in the Bronx. If you know anything about New York, the Bronx isn't the best part of New York City. But now this is a school that has mainly black kids and Latino kids, and what they do, part of their daily routine is when they work through one of these, they have to get up and give an oral report to the rest of the class. So they're learning now how to present things orally. And the presentation isn't just going to be, this is what I think, but here are my reasons. And there are pros and there are cons, but the cons overweigh the pros. So we shouldn't do it. So the students have to really show that they're thinkers in all of this. Now this is a story, it's this book, about a child who lied about his grandfather to get his grandfather a job. The job was pulling weeds out of a garden, but the grandfather didn't know a weed from a flower, and he pulled all the flowers out. And the owner of the garden is not happy. So the question is, okay, how can we make the owner of the garden happy? And these kids said, well, the boy should go and tell the truth. And I remember hearing these kids, one of them said, you know, yeah, telling the truth is the right thing to do. You have to tell the truth. So, but then they decided that telling the truth was not a good solution to this problem. You know why? And that's what they say. And that's what she's explaining. It's not the best solution. Okay? This means it's very important, pro and con, consequences. It's because they realize that tell the truth isn't going to fix the garden. You have to do more than just telling the truth. If you want to make the owner of the garden happy, you have to come up with a solution that gives him back his garden. Okay, now, whether you agree with that or not, it's not that they think that you should lie, they think that's just not enough. Now, I thought, that's pretty good thinking by these little kids. And they're expressing it, so they're getting used to interacting with the other children and reporting. Okay? Not just what they believe, but the reasons, so that they can really have a good discussion. This is in Chile, posting their ideas on a big graphic organizer so the whole class can see it. This is a school in Victoria for infants up for 3, 4, 5-year-old kids. And they're using compare, contrast. And this student is going to report what the results are to the other students. This one, you can't see it, but this is in Basque. It's from a school in, I think in San Sebastian, actually. And these are little kids, it's transportation they're learning about, and they have to make a trip to, I don't know, a zoo or something. and they have to decide how they're going to go. So should they go by car, by airplane, by foot, by bus? And they think about the pros and cons, and they decide, well, we should go on the bus. Okay, well, it doesn't matter what the decision is. They're going through the process, and they have to explain why. Okay, now, I'm showing you these little kids, and I'm almost finished now with this presentation, but I want to just impress on you that what we found is if you start with 2-year-old kids, start them in their version of the kinds of thinking that you're trying to help students learn to do well, okay, they will learn, they'll practice, they'll get better and better at it. By the time they get to 4th grade, no graphic organizers anymore, they just can do it. Just like learning a language. You teach Spanish to little kids, you have to teach them some grammar and they have to get it right, but by the time they get to 4th and 5th grade, you don't have to say, well, what's the conjugation of this verb? No, they know it and they use it. Now you have to monitor it, maybe they slip, but hey, same way. This is a little girl in a Palestinian refugee camp. I trained a person in Amman, Jordan, to be a trainer, and he worked with the teachers, and these students are comparing and contrasting, and these are little girls, and they already feel the sort of ambiance in Arab countries about women, okay, and they're very shy. But this teacher has got these little girls to get up the courage to get up and read their conclusions and explain why. Okay. And the teacher posts them, honors the kids by writing their ideas on the board. So this is more than just learning. It's self-esteem, it's interest in a subject, okay? And this one brings tears to my eyes. These are students, this is from Chile. In Chile, they have a pull-out system where students who have disabilities get pulled out, okay? And if they have emotional disabilities or psychological disabilities, okay, like autism, dyslexia, they get pulled out and they're in a separate class. And teachers treat them as kids who can't learn. Except that this teacher learned about TBL and how to construct these classrooms and found that even though these kids can't speak the language, they can express themselves in pictures. And that's what they do. And they are comparing and contrasting a famous naval battle that nobody here has ever heard of, in a war that you've never heard of, I think. Has anybody here ever heard of the Pacific War? That was a war between Chile and Peru over mining rights in the 1890s. And these kids know all about it. And they're expressing the fact that the Peruvian ship that sank the Chilean Navy, okay, was a much better constructed ship made of steel, whereas the Chilean ships are made of wood. And that's why, even though Chile won the war, okay, the Peruvian Navy defeated the Chilean Navy. I mean, has anybody ever heard of that? These kids know all about it, and they're expressing themselves in pictures. Okay, now, thinking about thinking. Well, this is a way now to move students from what they're doing, what kind of thinking, how did you do it, and then plan how you're going to do it next time. So that this is a way to get students to start to direct their own thinking. So the teacher can say, go to your plan for your strategy and use it. Okay? You can construct your own graphic organizer, etc. So the move is to try to get the students to do what we do all the time in language and math. We get the students to actually practice, but they do it themselves. And the teacher moves away, you withdraw the scaffolding. Okay? So how would you do it next time? Okay? And now you've got a transition to student self-motivation. So, changing from teacher-centered classrooms student-centered classrooms. Before, when I showed you this, I said, how do you do that? Well, now we know. And this is a bad metaphor, the tip of the iceberg. Because it's not an iceberg, okay? It's a shining sun, okay? So there you have teachers doing things in classrooms. I just want to mention the very last step in this process. How can you then use all of this to transform your curriculum in your school so that you have organized, okay, approaches to the use of these different thinking skills? Now, there are a lot of them. I've just shown you 2 of them, but I've broken them into 3 categories using Benjamin Bloom, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. Here's compare and contrast, here's decision making, here's reliable sources, prediction, generating creative ideas. You can teach students all of these in the same way. And then how can you help them make use of these in an organized school program where everything is driven by thinking? That's the challenge. Here are these thinking skills. And I just came from Victoria. When I came here, where I was working with a school, Carmelita School, okay, a school with about 90 teachers, and they were at this point. They were mapping TBL into their whole school curriculum so that for every piece of content, they would select thinking skills that will, pay off in content learning and understanding. And they will have constructed a big school program. So I want to end just by showing you, we are going to be doing a summer institute in Madrid during the month of July. And it's not just me, but a number of my colleagues. And Fernando Trujillo from Spain is going to be joining us. And if you're interested, that's the webpage you should look at. And you know this already, they've come with these books. But if you want the English version, we can give you the English version, okay? But there's an even better book. This is a 500-page book of lessons on all of these skills. The only drawback is that it's in English. Okay? But if you read English and you want this, then write to, okay, my assistant Elena, who is here today, and she will help you to get it. But I will say that we've now started a project with SM Publishers so that we are producing similar kinds of books in Spanish based on the work of Spanish teachers in the Spanish curriculum. And the first one, there are going to be 6 of these, okay, infants in K, 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up through bachillerato. And the first one is going to be ready, they say, in October. So you'll have this resource in Spanish. And now, a word of caution. I showed you some lessons. There are lessons in these books. If you get these books, that doesn't mean go off and teach these lessons. It means think about how you could do the same thing with your own content and your own students. Come up with your own lessons and lesson ideas. That's how this has grown. And you can contribute to that. So, all students can be good thinkers and good learners, and it's not hard to do it. Can't do it overnight. You need practice. You need to learn these skills. But, we now have 6 schools in Spain certified as TBL schools, and we're working with 20 others that are doing this kind of project. And it's not hard to do, but you just need to do it. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Robert, por su estancia aquí. Esto es el inicio de una posible colaboración que también queremos hacer con Robert Swartz desde la Obra Social de Ibercaja y desde el programa de Educar para el Futuro. Y bueno, les emplazamos para la semana que viene, que tendremos a Mar Romera entre nosotros, el miércoles que viene, con la conferencia cómo influyen las emociones en el aprendizaje. Muchísimas gracias a todos y buenas noches.